want to talk for a moment about immunity. About immunity. I want to tell you guys a little bit of history about immunity. I want you guys to understand the history of immunity because it's a lie. It's bullshit. It's not true. Okay. And let me explain to you the reason why. Okay. So the very first case that the United States Supreme Court ever heard was a case called Chisholm versus Georgia in 1793. And in this particular case, an individual was suing the state of Georgia. He was from South Carolina. He was suing the state of Georgia for failure to pay bonds, right? And so he brought up this argument that said that a dispute between B and A is most certainly a dispute between A and B. So he was basically pointing out the fact that it really doesn't matter whether you're a petitioner or respondent, the position that you're in the case, it doesn't change the makeup of the body or the entity that's in the party. And so, but he was suing for under Article 3, the exact same argument that we have today. He brought up. Now, one thing is that in 1793 he successfully litigated it with the argument that a dispute between A and B is most certainly a dispute between B and A. My argument that's at the Supreme Court is that if 1 + 2 = 3 is unconstitutional, clearly 2 + 1 = 3 is also unconstitutional. Simply rearranging the order of the parties does not magically change the representation of the parties. So Chisholm versus Georgia, 1793, the Supreme Court, they come out and they say, yep, there is no immunity, all right? And it was a 4-1 ruling on the court because there were 5 justices at the time. So 4-1 ruling. And they said the states gave up their sovereignty in order to join the Union to subject themselves to the supremacy of the United States Constitution. So the definition of a sovereign state is a state complete in itself, not subject to a higher government's laws. That's the definition of a sovereign state. So when the state of California says I'm sovereign, what they're saying is that they are not subject to a higher government's laws, because that's the definition of a sovereign state. The state of California cannot be sovereign because a non-sovereign state is a state that is not complete in itself, subject to a higher government's laws. So when the state of California, when they entered into the Union, they willfully entered into the Union and they willfully subjected themselves to the supremacy of the United States Constitution. And in doing so, they gave up their sovereignty. And as a result, they don't have the authority to be able to create their own laws and then substitute that for the guaranteed Constitution, because that would mean the state is sovereign and they can do whatever they want. That's not a union. That's not. So a union is 2 or more non-sovereign states with a central governing structure, right? That's a union. Now, a confederacy is 2 or more sovereign states with a loose, decentralized governing structure. So today we have a confederacy, right? And we all know today that confederacies promote slavery, right? We know that from our own history and our own Civil War. So, we have a confederacy because these states believe that they're sovereign. They don't believe that they gave up their sovereignty to subject themselves to the supremacy of the United States Constitution, but that's not true. The United States Constitution is the overarching laws. You gave up your sovereignty when you joined the Union, subjected yourself willingly to the supremacy of the United States Constitution. As a result, you don't have the authority to be able to create your own laws, substitute them for the guaranteed Constitution, because that would be an act of sovereignty by a non-sovereign state. Again, going back to Chisholm, what happened then was that the Supreme Court decided, the states are not sovereign. And they gave it up, and so all of a sudden Chisholm won his case. Yay, everybody's happy. Sovereign immunity doesn't exist. Well, what immediately happened right after that was that the states threw a fit. They're like, well, we didn't give up our sovereignty. We maintained. If we would have known that, we would have never entered into the Union. Right? And there was this big up in arms that existed. And right or wrong, what happened was we passed the 11th Amendment, right? 1795. We passed the 11th Amendment. And so, again, right or wrong, it doesn't matter. It was enacted. It was ratified by the people. It is law, right? So the 11th Amendment was put into place. But so before I hit that, so then what happens is we have 100 years of major cases. We have Martin versus Hunter's Lessee. We have Cohen's versus Virginia. We have McCulloch versus Maryland. We have huge Supreme Court cases over the course of 100 years. Huge cases. Every single one of them said states are not sovereign. Every single one of them. Look them up. Every one of them. In fact, most of them even made the statement, the states are not sovereign, right? McCulloch versus Maryland and the Cohen's versus Virginia, they all state that states are not sovereign. But then you fast forward to 1890, and it was a case called Hans versus Louisiana. It was by the Wake Court. Now, Waite was well known to be a slave sympathizer, right? He wanted the slavery institution to continue, right? He came from, I believe, Tennessee, so he was a slave sympathizer. He put into place numerous rulings that undermined the Reconstruction Amendment and has now led to another 180 years of oppression of the people and certain minorities within our society because of his acts that were intentional to undermine the very laws that we put into place to try to prevent this thing from happening again. Racism, again, it has no place within our society. Economicism has no place within our society, right? We are a nation of good people as long as we accept the fact that we didn't do this. We didn't cause this. This isn't our fault, right? It's not natural to hate another human being based upon any criteria whatsoever. That is created, it's learned because that creates conflict. Conflict creates crime. Crime creates criminals, and criminals make them in their institution a lot of money. And we got to get away from it, right? We got to understand that we didn't cause this. This wasn't our fault. So what happened was 1890, Hans versus Louisiana comes forward, and Hans was suing the state of Louisiana, right? He lived in Louisiana. He was suing the state because what happened was the 11th Amendment. What the 11th Amendment says is it says that a citizen of one state cannot sue a different state. That's all it says. It's all it says. Read it. That's all it says. Okay. So what it did was the 11th Amendment technically overruled and overcame the Chisholm issue, where an individual from South Carolina was suing Georgia, and they said, "Oh no, you can't have that happen. You can't sue a different state, right? Citizen of that state can't sue this other state." So the 11th Amendment technically overruled part of the immunity issue, and it said that you can't sue a different state. But it said nothing at all about suing your own state. Nothing at all. Go read it. It says nothing at all about suing your own state. But what it did was it intentionally corrected the Chisholm issue, and it made it so that a citizen in one state cannot sue a different state. Fast forward to Hans versus Louisiana, 1890. And what happened there was that the Waite Court, once again, known to be slave sympathizers, known to want to advance the slavery institution, what they said was, you know what? We don't read the 11th Amendment literally. We read it figuratively, and we believe that its interpretation was that the states are sovereign. So they said, we don't read it literally. We read it figuratively, and we believe that it means that states are sovereign. Thus, sovereign immunity is born. Thus, sovereign immunity is born. And now, from 1890 on, we believe that states are sovereign, even though nowhere in the Constitution does it say that you can't sue your own state. It does say in the 11th Amendment you can't live in one state and sue a different state, but it does not say anything at all about suing your own state. However, the Supreme Court came out and said, "Oh yeah, it doesn't say it, but we think that it implied that." Well, the problem is that the Supreme Court of the United States has no authority to be able to alter, amend, or destroy the Constitution of the United States based upon judicial fiat, right? If you want to change the Constitution, you got to go back to Article 5, determine how to do it, and follow those procedures. And that doesn't come by way of the Supreme Court of the United States saying, "Well, you know what? It doesn't say it, but we want to do it anyway." All right? Doesn't work that way. So one of the things that we have in our advantage here when it comes to sovereign immunity and overcoming it here is, one, Supreme Court, you have no authority to be able to alter, amend, or destroy the Constitution. So what you did was unconstitutional because you amended the Constitution in 1890 without lawful authority, because all legislative power is vested in Congress of the United States. And the separation of powers means that the judicial branch has no authority to be able to say, we're going to do this. But we can also go to the Supreme Court itself, because in 1995, there was a case, 1997, there was a case called Seminole Tribe of Florida versus Florida. And it wasn't that the court overruled, the Supreme Court of the United States overruled sovereign immunity, but what is telling was the dissension. It was written by Justice Souter. And what Justice Souter said is he said there appears to be two versions of the 11th Amendment that exist. One enacted by the people in 1795, the other conceived by this court almost a century later. So the dissension written by Justice Souter says that the Supreme Court of the United States conceived the alteration of the Constitution, and it doesn't exist. One enacted by the people in 1795, the other conceived by this court almost a century later. The judicial branch has no authority to conceive law. That would be legislated from the bench. That would be a separation of powers issue. So Justice Souter pointed to it directly in 1997 in that case, Seminole Tribe versus Florida, saying that, yeah, the Supreme Court conceived this law. It has nothing. It's not even there. It doesn't even exist. So it was by case law that we see the creation of sovereign immunity, but it has nothing to do with the Constitution. Nothing at all to do with the Constitution. So judicial branch, if you want to change the Constitution, I would suggest that you present your case to the people, right? Get the people to agree to your argument, and thus we alter the Constitution in a lawful manner. And otherwise, what you did was an act of sedition created by traitors of the United States, right? So we can go back to the Waite Court and we can say, wait, you never had authority to be able to do that because what you did was an act of sedition, because sedition is the speaking or writing the words such as law established in order to cause disaffection of the Constitution to procure its alteration in an other than lawful manner, okay? So the Supreme Court doesn't have the authority to be able to alter, amend, or destroy the Constitution of the United States.
I'ma shine in the shadows even when the stakes are high.